Welcome to the session, Proven in a Greenhouse, from trial to the results with the next gen substrate. I am Kei Jong. I'm a R&D manager at SunGrow.
And I'm Harrison Meekins. I'm a grower specialist with SunGrow in the Southeast region.
We were here on this same stage last year, and we introduced the science behind two of new technology we delivered to the market. And today, we are even more excited to share what we learned from the real world. So let me get started. So here is the two new technologies we introduced last year with all science. But we are here, since then we promoted, to the try by, the growers to see the real value in the real world. And we are not here just to introduce a new raw material or new products. We designed these two new technologies to give you the solutions because we are here listening to you and identify the problems and challenges, and we are designing the solutions all together. So our collaboration with the growers has been awesome journey, to learn about our technology even more, so that has been very exciting journey. So let me start with the biochar, Black Bear Biochar. I should use the technology here. So before we jump into the, what we have learned, what we have seen, from the real world in the greenhouses with the growers, let me review a little bit about science. I do love science, so I love to share more about it briefly today. And then Harrison will jump in to share what we have learned, from the growers. So we designed this particles, biochar. It's not just a byproduct. We engineered this specific particles to give the performance and to provide the functions as a solutions for issues and challenges. So these coarse particles will act like a perlite in the growing media to give a structure for better drainage and aeration. That's not all. Even more, there are more values and more performance. So on your left, this is the SEM images, very high power solutions to get into the surface and how it look like. The structure you can see, it's a very porous internal structure. And on your right, it's a perlite. Nothing wrong with the perlite. Perlite was designed to give the structure in the media as an aggregate, but it was not designed for more value than aeration and drainage functions. But this biochar with a very unique structure, high surface area with the porous internal structure. What does that mean? Science. Okay, what does that mean for growers? Harrison will share what that means. And this is another view of the surface of a biochar. On the left, it's a pure biochar. And we wanted to see what kind of, is it really working to retain more nutrients? Yes, it is. On your right, can you see a little crusty on the surface? That's the accumulation of a fertilizer we applied on. So your liquid fertilizer, we dipping in the biochar in the solution over 30 minutes, hour, and half a day, and over 7 days. So we checked, how much nutrients are retained on the surface. That will be happening in the pore space internally as well. So you can see how much nutrients can be retained just by little particles. So have you heard biochar has high CEC, right? Cation exchange capacity. It's even more than cation exchange capacity. So there are, proven science behind. There are multiple mechanisms to retain the nutrients. So someone said, biochar is a magnetics to retain the nutrients more than CEC. And even more, do you grow any geraniums or pH sensitive crops? This is the solutions. The biochar has a very high pH, very alkaline raw material. That can be concern. but we designed our product to make it as a value. So this biochar can give a liming effect for long term. What does that mean? This can give you more buffering capacity, buffer to pH changes. So we have seen very successful story with geraniums and the pH sensitive crops with this biochar mixes. So all these values I just mentioned, all these benefits, we have seen proven, results. What's the results of these benefits and and also science? We tested, this is a petunia plugs we tested at the Virginia Tech with the Chris, and we tested with one of the best peat perlite mix, sunshine, perlite mix, and the peat black bear biochar mix. Can you see how much more root mass in the root box? So this is a demonstration, what values plants can pick up from that technology in the biochar. So that has been the story from R&D. We generated all the data and proof of the science with our research partners. And then I was a little scared to bring our products out field and tested by growers. But every day, like I'm hearing good stories, positive comments, and all good feedback. So I have been so excited. So Harrison, can you share all the great story?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kay. Over the last year or so, we've done over 260 grower trials with our Black Bear Biochar soils. And it's one thing for us to do the R&D in a lab or research setting where it's a very controlled environment, but we really wanted to see, does this work in a commercial setting at scale? And so I'm going to go over with you guys today just a few of the most common pieces of feedback that we've heard from growers throughout these trials. And I also want to emphasize to you guys that as a company, SunGrow understands that switching your soil can be a really big change. There's a lot that comes along with that. A lot of times people are worried about having to retrain on how to water, changing cultural practices. And so it's a big commitment. And from SunGrow's perspective, we're committed to doing these trials so that you guys have the opportunity to see how these mixes perform in the greenhouse before you have to make that commitment. So we'll go over each of these in more detail, but these are the key takeaways that we've heard across all of our grower trials doing the Black Bear biochar mixes. We've seen improved root development. In some cases, plants have grown faster, and so you may be able to get a faster finish on certain species, depending on what you're growing and your growing practices. We've also seen improved nutrient retention. And as Kay mentioned, the biochar has much more buffering capacity than perlite. So we've also seen that the pH is stable over a longer period of time, so you don't get pH drift. We've also seen in some species that there's more compact growth, which we're starting to look into more on the R&D side, but this is something that's really exciting to us because this is another place that biochar could potentially add value in the greenhouse if it means that growers could potentially reduce their PGR applications. And then overall, the aesthetics of these mixes, it just looks much more natural and cleaner. And the biochar, because of the coarse surface that you saw in those scanning electron microscope images, it doesn't float to the top of the pot like perlite. So it has a much cleaner finish when people are growing in it. So this is the piece of feedback that we heard the most throughout all of the trials that we did, is that we had improved root development, and that meant not only healthier looking roots, but more root mass. And as many of you know, the plant it all starts at the roots. If you don't have a good root zone, you're not going to have a good plant. So even though many customers are, when they're out purchasing a plant, they're looking at the top growth, that top growth is driven by the root development. And so you can see here in this photo on your left, this is in clematis, which is a notoriously difficult plant to root. You can see just how much more root development there is. So the root mass is much larger. But in addition to that, many of our growers also saw faster rooting in the beginning of their trials. So this alocasia that you see on your right, this is at about the 2-week mark. And you can see with the competitor soil, there was only one root getting to the bottom of that pot. Whereas with the black bear soil, it was already starting to root out all the way to the bottom. So in some cases, growers also reported to us that they saw faster finishing times with their crops. So you can see in both of these photos, the top growth is dramatically improved over the competitor soils that they were using. And we think a lot of this has to do with the improved nutrient retention and the optimized pH over the course of the crop cycle. This photo on the left is comparing it to a bark mix. And this is actually one of our own bark mixes. We just had a customer that was interested in biochar soils. They wanted to give it a try. And so the bark mix that they're using is something that we've had for years. It's one of our most popular SKUs. It's tried and true. But you can see the difference in terms of the shoot growth on this plant here. And so this grower actually reported to us that the in the biochar soils, their plants actually finished up to a week and a half faster. So from a floriculture perspective, that's really, really critical. And that's something that the R&D team is looking into more, because if you can get faster finish in some of your greenhouse crops, that means you can get more turns, and that's more potential for revenue. Now, this is most likely species dependent, and it will also depend on some of your cultural practices. So we're working hard to prove these claims and vet them out on the R&D side. But just anecdotally, this is something that we've seen from a few growers that is really catching our eye. And then you can see with this other photo on the right with these ferns in the Black Bear 15, you can just see how much more shoot growth there is. And so if you're in a retail setting, you can guess pretty easily which one the consumer is going to choose here. The other thing that a lot of growers had reported to us was improved nutrient retention and pH stability. So in this trial in particular, this grower was having a lot of issues with their pH drifting. The pH was getting pushed down really rapidly. Some of that was probably because of the fertilization practices that they were using, but because biochar has improved buffering capacity, it has much more buffering capacity than perlite. It resists changes in pH. And so this is something that is really, really critical, especially for longer term crops. The longer you're going to have a plant in this mix, the more potential there is for things to go wrong and for your pH to drift out of that optimum range. But by incorporating biochar as opposed to perlite, you're able to get that improved buffering capacity, and you can maintain that optimum pH for a longer period of time so that nutrients stay available. And with biochar having much more cation exchange capacity than perlite, you're retaining the nutrients in the pot better, so that those nutrients are readily available for the plant to take up, and you're not leaching them out into the environment around you. So this is something that's really critical, because this is kind of the value proposition of biochar mixes. You have a mix that gives you the same structure, aeration, and drainage as a peat perlite mix, but then you get these improved chemical characteristics as well. Another really interesting piece of feedback that we got from some of our growers is that in certain species, they were seeing more compact growth. So you can see here that these are some impatiens grown in 6-inch pots. I also had a trial where I was working with a grower that was growing calla lilies. And in both instances, they reported that the plants grown in the biochar were much more compact in terms of their growth habit, which means that there's potential to reduce the PGR applications, or at least reduce the concentration of PGRs when you're applying, which saves you money on the back end. This is something that's likely species dependent, and so Kay is working with the R&D team to see what species interact this way. Is this something that's widespread across all of the crop groups that we see? And if you can reduce and save on PGRs, how much? We want to quantify that for you guys. But just anecdotally, this is something that we're starting to see across several different floriculture crops. So this is just another place where biochar wins over perlite. And then last but not least, we have a lot of growers that are doing high quality indoor house plants, or they sell to landscapers that are doing high end landscape installations. And so they really don't like to see the perlite floating to the top of these pots or in their garden beds. And the beauty of this black bear biochar is that it has a very clean, natural look to it. And because it has a very rough surface to it, it grips to the peat inside the mix and it doesn't float to the top. And so you're getting a much cleaner finish on the plant. And especially in a house, for house plants or in a landscape setting, this is something that, when you're walking by, you don't want to notice perlite floating everywhere. And so this just looks a lot cleaner, a lot more natural. So if you have customers that are selling specifically to landscapers, or if you're somebody that's growing for houseplants specifically and aesthetics are something that really matters to you, this is a great place to look. So we went over a few different crops here, but the thing that I want to emphasize to everybody is that this is a very versatile mix. Basically, you can grow just about any crop in our Black Bear Biochar mixes, and we've formulated and engineered them to be able to replace peat perlite mixes. So if you're currently using a peat perlite mix, then you should consider using biochar mixes because we've engineered them to where there's no change in terms of the cultural practices that you need to apply. So let's say you're using a mix that has 15% perlite, you can switch to one of our mixes that has 15% biochar, and you're not going to have to change how you irrigate or treat that plant, which makes it much, much easier to transition because you're not having to retrain your entire staff. And it works for a lot of different crops. You know, geraniums notoriously have a lot of issues with pH. Uh, then there's just some of the tried and true crops that are easier to grow, like chrysanthemums, but you're getting improved growth on them. So it's a very versatile all purpose mix. So anywhere that you're looking at using a peat perlite mix, you can consider using a peat biochar mix because you're basically getting it at the same price, but then you're getting all of the improved performance that's associated with biochar. So just to kind of summarize all the key takeaways, what we've heard from our growers, and again, this is over the course of 260 plus trials, we're seeing improved root development. We're seeing plants that grow bigger, faster, stronger. Nutrient retention is improved. pH is stable over the course of the crop cycle. In some cases, we're seeing more compact growth, and it has a natural aesthetic to it that just looks better than the competitor.